You're listening to Dramas Over Flowers with Saya, Anisa, and Paroma. Welcome, my favorite listeners. This is your host, Paroma. And yes, we have been away for a while, and it was completely unplanned, but as it turns out, very necessary for our collective mental health. Sometimes you just gotta do these things, even though you don't think the time is right. Okay, so we absolutely plan on coming back really soon. We have a few episodes recorded, and we'll probably be back to our regularly scheduled programming by next week. But before that, I wanted to release this one episode that was originally a video on my YouTube channel, link in the description. But I always thought this would make for a really good podcast episode. And since it's been getting some good responses on my channel, I asked for permission from my co-hosts, and now I present to you, was Han Ji-pyeong the real male lead of Startup? A few of you have already watched this on my channel, but for the rest of you, see, I have some theories. I hope you have the patience to go through them with me and let me know your thoughts. Alright, without further ado, let's get this started. Do you guys miss Han Ji-pyeong from Startup? Lately, I've been wondering what it was about this character that just gripped us so much. How is it that he has been immortalized as this kind of tragic anti-hero in our hearts? And was it intentional on the show's part? Let's find out by getting into my drama notes.
So Dal-mi?
Let's start by talking about what made Han Ji-pyeong so appealing as a character. My personal take is that he, compared to Nam-do-san, our actual main lead, was just more compelling. Why was he compelling? Well, let's start from the very first episode. He just had a more complex childhood, a more difficult childhood, a childhood that garnered more of our sympathy. Now, again, Namdo-san's childhood, as rainbows and sunshine as it was, he had supportive parents, he was a genius, everybody thought he was just a great kid. Basically, he was really well loved. But of course, his issue was that as much as his family had expectations, as a little boy, it was too much pressure, and he ended up cheating in this one exam, and he ended up getting first. And that kind of broke something inside him. He felt like he was a liar, he was a fake. And by itself, that's actually a really good backstory to a character and probably would have had our sympathy right there, except this was being pitted against Han Ji-pyeong's backstory, where he's this orphaned boy who at a very young age has to make very adult decisions. He's the only one who can take care of himself, has realized that money and social status are the only things that can give him security, and desperately wants that security to the point where he's willing to shove away the affection and, like the protective hand of this grandmotherly woman who kind of adopts him and really tries to help him. But it's because he has that desperation in him that it's really hard to dislike him. You end up liking him because we can all empathize with that kind of need for security and safety. And it's not like it comes at no cost. Halmoni, which is Dalmi's grandmother, is the only adult in his life who loves him, genuinely wants something good for him, and to have to cheat her or eventually have to just leave her so that he can go on his own path is really, really hard for this young boy, because Harmony, Dalmi's grandmother, was the only adult in his life who genuinely wished him well and genuinely had affection for him, and he had to leave her and go away so that he could establish himself the way he wanted. He had a plan in his head, and in his child's mind, the only way he could get out of poverty and find that social status was by following that path with no deterrence from anyone. It's a very lonely existence. So you're setting him up to be a far more sympathetic and also kind of charismatic character from his childhood. And then, of course, as he grows up, Kim Seon-ho's Han Ji-pyeong just keeps this character so enigmatic. He is someone who has got that success in his life. He's very good at his job, but he has never really had a lot of affection in his life except for Harmony's brief presence in his childhood. So he has become a person who's capable of sympathy but just doesn't exercise it much. He is very analytical and doesn't really see things beyond a black and white of like what fits in a spreadsheet. So this character grows up to be somebody who needs another perspective to be thrust into his world, which is what you have the rest of the cast do. So in a way, the drama's first half is a lot about Han Ji-pyeong, about him growing up in this really lonely way, him connecting with this family, with Harmony, and through the letters with Dal-mi, having this brief respite from his kind of really sad storyline until he grows into an adult who has achieved everything he wanted to achieve but is now also suffering the consequences of those years of isolation. He's lonely. He doesn't have anyone in his life except like an AI machine that he's testing out.
검색해드릴까요?
내가 너 때문에 웃는다.
The first half is basically about Han Ji-pyeong, is what I'm trying to say. This is why we love this guy so much. The story really builds him up. Now, why do we think that Han Ji-pyeong is perfect for Dal-mi? I don't think that most of us are very attached to the idea that Han Ji-pyeong is better with Dal-mi than Nando-san. It's more that from a sort of story satisfaction point of view, it would have been more satisfying to see Han Ji-pyeong with Dal-mi for several reasons. The first is, of course, their childhood connection. We are kind of programmed to see sort of childhood sweethearts, childhood connections as like this thing that builds like a fated love story. That's what K-dramas do. Hey, you had a crush on this guy when you were 9 years old. He's your fated one. You will meet him almost coincidentally 25 years later and he'll still be your fated one. That's just what K-dramas do. So we are programmed to expect it. The other thing is, of course, that he has such a loving and, yes, complex, guilt-ridden but also like a grateful, sweet relationship with Harmony, Dal-mi's grandmother, that you kind of want him to become Harmony's real grandson by getting together with Dal-mi. Dal-mi is kind of secondary in this whole matter because, of course, as the audience, we are not really looking at her choice. Who does she want to be with? We are looking at these through a lens of conventional tropes, what we are used to and what has always given audiences satisfaction when they see them happening in romantic storylines. The final reason we kind of want him with Dal-mi is probably because he is perpetrating the Cyrano de Bergerac trope, the catfishing trope where the letter writer pretends that they are somebody else because they want to hide their own identity. Maybe they're ashamed of something about themselves, don't want that to come in front. Now, that is not how Startup does it. And I made this entire video about how Startup's catfish trope, the Cyrano de Bergerac trope, is different from how it's traditionally done. Please go watch that. But the main essence of it is that usually the man/woman behind the words is the one who ends up with their romantic interest. Because while Cyrano is pretending to be someone else to write the letter to his sweetheart, he's the man whose mind came up with all the words that won her heart. It's not the looks that matter, it's the insides. So technically, if you look at things that way, it's Han Ji-pyeong who had been writing the letters to Dal-mi when they were kids. So, of course, again, you want him as the man behind the words, the heart that Dal-mi fell in love with as a child, which I'm not entirely sure it counts, but whatever. The words that she had a crush on came from him, not from Nando-san. So all of these things together create the situation where the audience is primed to really want Han Ji-pyeong to win Dal-mi. Okay, so now we have established why Han Ji-pyeong was so attractive to us, why we really wanted him to end up with Dal-mi, and clearly the show built him up in the first half to make us want this pairing to happen. But then why did the show decide that Nando-san was the main lead? Why did they end up together and Han Ji-pyeong was kind of left out in the cold? Why did that happen? Well, I think startups creators wanted to subvert certain tropes. The first obvious trope to subvert is the chaebol winning over the everyman. Or in this case, Han Ji-pyeong's richer, more experienced guy winning over the inexperienced, somewhat awkward Namdo-san. The drama subverts this by making Han Ji-pyeong's experience and suaveness not one of his strengths, but one of his weaknesses. He has become cynical in life, overconfident. He misses things. He puts too much importance on things like table etiquette. What he really should be focusing on is helping young, ambitious, innovative, and inexperienced startups really find their footing. So throughout the drama, we see that Han Ji-pyeong keeps getting derailed by petty reservations and by being overly cautious, whereas Namdo-san, without any experience in the field, just with lots of guts and lots of ambition, keeps trying new things, failing and then trying again, and that is what ends up really, really appealing to So Dal-mi about him. Again, it's not like K-dramas haven't done this before, but it's always kind of satisfying to see the weaker character like David going up against Goliath and David winning. And in this case, Dal-mi choosing the mere mortal versus the giant. The other trope they kind of subverted very intentionally was giving into the sweetheart, fated one storyline. Dal-mi chooses to be with the man she gets to know as an adult and not with the boyish letter writer she had fallen in love with 10 years back. We don't see that often enough in drama, so I appreciated this storyline. And the third and final trope that they subverted is kind of connected to the first one. They wanted the second lead to get the girl. We've been having this discussion a lot in the last few years in the fandom about the beta males winning over the alpha males in K-drama romances more and more. Now, while Han Ji-pyeong and Namdo-san don't really fit into the beta alpha molds, there are certain characteristic traits that define the main lead, the tragic backstory, the aggressive, hostile, kind of isolated personality. These things kind of make up the alpha male lead trope. Again, done beautifully in Han Ji-pyeong and not at all tropishly, but you guys know what I'm talking about. So when you have the beta male come from behind and win the girl, it's a bit of a surprise, and it's also definitely a subversion of what you would expect to happen in the drama. Because like I said, in the first half, most of the reasons why we wanted Dal-mi and Han Ji-pyeong to get together and Han Ji-pyeong to finally be a part of Halmuni's real family was because of conventional tropes used to establish him as kind of the main lead. Which brings us to, the drama did this on purpose. The drama really wanted us to see Han Ji-pyeong as the main lead. When Startup was being promoted, it was not made clear that Nam Ji-hyuk was the protagonist. It was clearly an ensemble thing, but also, the romantic pairing do tend to have main billing. And in terms of the history of their work, Nam Ji-hyuk had been main lead in probably more projects than Kim Seon-ho at that point. And in terms of popularity, Kim Seon-ho was not a known name. Nam Ji-hyuk was. So in terms of that billing, it was kind of assumed that Nam Ji-hyuk was probably the main lead, but like I said, it wasn't established strongly enough that when we were watching the first half, it seemed likely enough that maybe Kim Seon-ho's character is the one who gets the girl. Now we come to the backlash that the drama faced. I honestly don't think that audience's really strong reaction to how Han Ji-pyeong ended up hurt the drama, because till the very last episode, a lot of the viewers were kind of hoping something happens. When Namdo-san leaves for 3 years, quite a few people were still hanging on till the last episode, waiting for Dal-mi to kind of realize, I think, Namdo-san and I would just never have worked. He's got It would not have worked. I am actually very much in love with Ji-pyeong, who's been at my side for 3 years. The love for Han Ji-pyeong was so strong that people were hanging on till the very last episode, waiting for Han Ji-pyeong to maybe get his happily ever after. It was just, the stakes were really high for the audience, which also meant that the ratings were really high for the show. The show had like above 5% rating, which was really high for TVN in Seoul and nationwide, which, just take my word for it, it's really high. They started off high enough, like 4.5-ish, but by the end of the drama, they were consistently hitting 5%. So that tells you, despite our really hostile reaction to how the show ended, people watched it till the very end. Quite a few people watched it till the very end because they wanted to see what happens to Han Ji-pyeong. So yeah, I mean, regardless of the showrunner's original intent, it all kind of worked out for the show. But I also don't think that the creators wanted us to hate the ending. They absolutely intended us to fall in love with Han Ji-pyeong, but I don't think anybody expected Han Ji-pyeong's character to kind of like take over the show, where he becomes more important than the rest of the cast of Startup. That was not their intent. So let's look at what the drama did wrong with Han Ji-pyeong. Now the funny thing is, like I said, the show really built up Han Ji-pyeong as the probable main lead in the first half, which put them in a position where they kind of overplayed their hand when it comes to the second half. What ended up happening was that Han Ji-pyeong became so big in the minds of the audience and such a fan favorite that in the second half, the writers had to convince us that no, while Han Ji-pyeong is really cool, it's Nam Do-san who's the real hero of the story. He's the guy with the straight moral arc. He's the guy who actually deserves to be with Dal-mi and to have like all the success and all of that. They really needed to work to establish Nam Do-san as the real hero of the story and not Han Ji-pyeong, which, I mean, I am so curious about like the, behind the scenes relationship between these two actors, because it couldn't have been fun to like come on board as the main lead and then kind of be relegated to second lead status for most of the story. I mean, the drama literally had to give Kim Seon-ho's Han Ji-pyeong a lot less screen time in the second half, so that we kind of start forgetting about him a little and focus more on Nam Do-san, whom they really needed to establish as the hero in this last leg of the story. Now, to make Nam Do-san shine in comparison to Han Ji-pyeong was not going to be an easy feat. So what they did was they resorted to very traditional hallmarks of second lead behavior and forced Han Ji-pyeong to go through with it. I'm making it sound like the creators kind of like got hold of Kim Seon-ho's throat and were like, you will behave in this way. But it kind of felt like that, didn't it? Okay, so what are these second lead traits that Han Ji-pyeong was displaying? I made a whole video about second leads and, how K-dramas point them out to us in the storyline, like how they make them behave. But here are 3 of the main characteristics. The first is that the second main lead will keep a secret from the heroine, often about the heroine or something that really concerns the heroine. And there's really never a very good reason why they would do it. But if there is a reason, it's usually because they need to protect themselves in some way. Emotionally, mostly, they need to protect themselves. And of course, Han Ji-pyeong doesn't want to tell So Dal-mi that he was the actual letter writer. Even though if he had done it at the right moment, he could have won her affection, maybe. But he holds back for too long because he's trying to protect himself emotionally. And so there you have number 1 characteristic of, a second lead. The next 2 were really out of character for Han Ji-pyeong, but to establish that he's the second lead, he had to do that. The first was that he had to confess to So Dal-mi about his feelings, even when he knew that she had feelings for another guy and that it was reciprocated. it's a very uncomfortable thing that second leads do, and the way K-dramas tend to justify it is that you need catharsis, you need to close this chapter, and you can only close this chapter once you have confessed and been solidly rejected. Think of last year's True Beauty. I mean, you had Hwang In-yeop had to confess to his schoolboy feelings for Moon Ga-young's character years later, when they had just been platonic friends for years. He had to make that confession to move on. And I used to find this really romantic at one point, and I kind of understood, hey, it's like a full circle thing. He has to move on. But then more recently, my feelings on this has changed, and I keep thinking that it's disrespectful. You know this woman has feelings for someone else, and that she sees you as a friend, probably a very good friend, someone to rely on, and you're kind of destroying this relationship, like her reliance on you, her being able to see you in a certain way, to like vent your feelings. And I don't buy that whole argument that once you have confessed your and been rejected, your feelings will just dissipate. If that was true, then most people would just confess and be like, oh, I feel so relieved now. I don't have feelings for you anymore. I just don't buy it. And I think it's a bit selfish. Okay, moving on. The third thing that Kim Seon-ho's Han Ji-pyeong did, very second leady, which is that after being rejected, he just hung around. So second male leads do this quite often. They kind of just hover around the female lead even after they have been either directly or indirectly rejected, because they haven't given up hope. Because the female lead having feelings for someone else and having roundly rejected you is not enough to end your hope. They keep having hope. And Han Ji-pyeong's treatment of this was particularly egregious, because even though he had 3 years when Nam Do-san was nowhere around, he kind of held off on reconfessing until Nam Do-san came back on the scene. He just hung around, not furthering their friendship, not getting over her, not doing much of anything. He just hung around, from what I could see, kind of making her a bit uncomfortable at times. And again, that takes us back to that thing where second leads kind of act selfishly, even though their great arc is supposed to be that they give up the female lead for her own happiness. It's practically never really done for her happiness. It's because they are finally convinced that her relationship with the other guy is stable and he can't shake that. So the second male lead will only give up when he is convinced that he can't win her. Her saying no to him doesn't matter, is not a deterrent. Anywho, so these are really annoying second lead behaviors, and Han Ji-pyeong does all of them. He's actually like the poster boy for second lead man in the second half, which is really frustrating to watch for all of the reasons that we loved him in the first half. As charismatic and decisive and sometimes wrong-headed, but often just well-intentioned as he was, his character shouldn't have had to go through these very conventional tropes to establish himself as the lesser man, just so that Nam Do-san could shine. I did not like that at all. Now, set all that aside, I think fans of Han Ji-pyeong would have been okay with him being relegated to second lead status if the show hadn't also sort of by implication taken away any chance of Han Ji-pyeong having a happy ending. And I don't necessarily mean a romantic ending with Dal-mi. I mean any kind of happy ending. He could have been paired off with someone else. That was always a possibility. But more importantly, they could have solved the actual tragedy of his arc, which was that Han Ji-pyeong is a character who isolated himself and is the kind of person who can't approach someone and become friendly with them and just like ingratiate himself with somebody's, circle. Just the way he can be with Harmony, he really can't be with anyone else. he just put some distance between himself and other characters. So you can't really envision him staying good friends with Dal-mi and Dosan once Harmony passes. So at the end of Startup, you leave him kind of in the periphery of this group of friends and teammates, but not really part of any core circle. His one relationship that he has re-established with Harmony sadly has a short, lifespan, probably. But you guys know what I mean, right? She's the only one who's directly invested in his well-being. And he needs someone like her, like with her kind of interest in him, to kind of barge into his life and shake some sense into him when he's like closing up again. So I think most of us really just wanted Han Ji-pyeong to have the kind of ending where he's either really part of the core group, like actually friends with them, and not just kind of having resolved his issues with them, which is where we leave him. And we wanted him to be like an active part of Dal-mi and Harmony's family, which was actually very possible, even if he was the second lead. If the show hadn't forced him to kind of hang around as like a third wheel for like 3 years without like just hanging around Dal-mi, making us kind of uncomfortable with his continued interest, even though he wasn't saying anything. Kind of trying to get her to a complacent space where he could suddenly spring his confession again. So creepy. If they hadn't done that with his character, if he had genuinely become kind of like a brotherly presence and like just let go of that whole Dal-mi obsession, because seriously, he didn't know the girl very well. It didn't actually make sense for him to be hanging on to her for so long after being roundly rejected. If they had just dropped his romantic angle with Dal-mi, he could have become a really solid part of, Harmony's family. But they didn't do that. They just really wanted to establish him as the first lead who lost and is definitely lesser than our eventual main lead, which is Namdo-san. I'm starting to confuse myself. They were so dedicated to making Han Ji-pyeong's character lesser in the second half that they kind of undercut his arc. Like, it was not satisfying to see that ending for Han Ji-pyeong. And mind you, fans were so hooked on his arc that they waited till the very last episode just to see if the show somehow does something and gives them that happy ending. They really wanted that. Now, as a side note, if you guys have watched Hometown Cha-Cha-Cha, which was Kim Seon-ho's next big project where he definitely was the main lead, their treatment of their second main lead was almost like a response to what happened with Startup. Like, the things that Startup did wrong, Hometown Cha-Cha-Cha very consciously tried to correct, or rather, stay away from in their own story. For instance, they didn't actually introduce the second male lead until almost, close to the halfway mark. So you've had ample time for the main, protagonist to really develop a relationship at that point. So you're already invested in their relationship, and the second lead just comes in way too late to mess with any of it. They also had the second male lead back off as soon as the female lead said no. He just accepted that he was too late and he just backed off. Yes, he did that confession thing, but in this case, this confession had some merit because the female lead, played by Shin Mina, used to have a crush on this guy. This was a sort of a cathartic resolution for both of them, not just for the second male lead. So it didn't feel as gratuitous and like wrong. It felt like it's a confession or a conversation that needed to happen so they could continue to be friends, which they did. It was actually a really healthy resolution to that second male lead confession thing. And finally, they let the really endearing second male lead have his own cute romance subplot, and they paired him off, and like he was happy by the end of the drama. Like they didn't just like make you fall in love with the second lead and then just leave him in this unhappy black hole to forever play the third wheel while the main pair just like walks off to the sunset. You know, because of the presence of Kim Seon-ho in both dramas, this treatment of the second lead in the two shows being so drastically different is something that really stands out. That sentence was terrible. So, Startup was, I think, my favorite, at least definitely one of my favorite dramas of 2020. There was so much about the drama I really loved. All the characters. I really liked the arc. And honestly, I was one of the people who were kind of happy that Dal-mi ended up choosing Namdo-san, the guy she actually got to know, and not the, crush from her imagination. So I am not really unhappy that Han Ji-pyeong didn't end up with Dal-mi, but I am still sore that he didn't get some kind of a satisfying happily ever after. Which is why when I saw Arvis's comment on my channel a few days back, I immediately started writing the outline for this video. This was my catharsis. This was my confession to the female lead, where I have to get my feelings out so that I can find closure. And if you like this video, you might want to try out another one of my video essays. It'll be fun, I promise.